The clock ticked to 6:50 p.m. on June 23, 2025. As 17-year-old, Emily stood at the edge of her family's dilapidated apartment, her body racked with pain from 7 grueling years. In her past life, her older brother James' gambling addiction had spiraled into a colossal debt, leading him to take his own life. This left their father, Robert, broken, and their mother, Margaret, paralyzed, slipping into a vegetative state. At just 10 years old, Emily had taken on the burden, working tirelessly, her hands bleeding from scrubbing floors, her lungs weakening from the damp air, all to pay off James' debts and care for her parents. For 7 years, she endured illness and exhaustion, only to hear whispers that James and her parents had plotted to abandon her. One fateful night, she confronted them, only to be pushed down the stairs by James and Robert, the betrayal sealing her fate. When Emily awoke, she was back in her childhood bed, the morning sun filtering through the curtains. It was 7 years earlier, the day before James' gambling troubles began. The date on her phone read June 24, 2018. 6 a.m. Her body felt young and scarred, and her mind buzzed with the memories of her past life. She had been reborn, and this time, she would not be a victim. Revenge burned in her chest, a fire stoked by every ache, every tear from her previous existence. Her first move was strategic. She found James in his room, counting a small wad of cash from a recent bet. "James," she said, her voice calm but laced with steel, "this ends now. Hand over the money." He smirked, tilting his head in that arrogant way she remembered from her final confrontation. But her eyes, hardened by 7 years of suffering, made him pause. She snatched the cash, hiding it in a loose floorboard, vowing to cut off his gambling lifeline. She then turned to her parents, still healthy in this timeline. She cooked them breakfast, her actions softening their guarded expressions. "Let's avoid trouble," she said, planting seeds of doubt about James' habits. But revenge was not just about prevention, it was about retribution. Emily knew James' weaknesses from her past life: his pride, his reliance on shady lenders, and his tendency to underestimate her. Over the next few weeks, she shadowed him, intercepting his contacts with bookies and redirecting his focus to menial jobs she arranged. The debts never grew, but Emily's plan was just beginning. She needed James to feel the despair she had endured, to face the consequences she'd been forced to shoulder. One evening, as the clock struck 7 p.m., Emily devised her first strike. She forged a letter in James' handwriting, addressed to a notorious loan shark, Mr. Carter, claiming he'd hidden a larger sum to avoid repayment. She slipped it under Carter's door, her heart pounding with anticipation. Days later, Carter's enforcers cornered James outside a noodle shop. Emily watched from a distance as they roughed him up, demanding the non-existent money. James' cries echoed, and Emily felt a cold satisfaction. This was just the start. Her next move targeted her parents' complicity. In her past life, they had stood by while James pushed her down the stairs, their silence a betrayal. Now, she needed to expose their weakness. She planted evidence, a fake diary entry suggesting Robert had taken bribes to cover James' debts where Margaret would find it. The next morning, an argument erupted, Margaret's voice shrill with accusation. Emily feigned innocence, letting their trust in each other erode. The tension grew, fracturing the family dynamic she once relied on. But the deepest revenge was reserved for James. Emily recalled the moment of her fall, the way his hands had shoved her, his smirk as she tumbled. She wouldn't kill him, death was too quick, but she would break him. She learned it of a high-stakes underground poker game James had bragged about in her past life. Using her rebirth knowledge, she infiltrated the circle, posing as a wealthy teenager with insider tips. She fed James false information, leading him to bet everything money she'd hidden, favors he'd promised on a losing hand. At 9 p.m., as the game unfolded in a smoky backroom, James' face paled as he realized the trap. The other player seized his belongings, and Emily slipped away, her smile hidden in the shadows. The final act came weeks later. James, now destitute and shunned, returned home, begging for help. Emily confronted him at midnight, the silver leaf from her rebirth glowing faintly in her hand. "You pushed me," she whispered, her voice steady. "You left me to suffer." James' eyes widened, recognizing the truth in her gaze. She didn't touch him. Instead, she recorded his confession with a hidden device, playing it for the village elders the next day. The community, outraged by his past and present deceit, banished him. Robert and Margaret, weakened by guilt and division, could only watch. By 7:22 p.m. on June 24, 2025, Emily stood on the balcony, the leaf pulsing in her palm. The village whispered of her triumph, of how she'd turned her family's fate. James was gone, her parents subdued, and the pain of her past life was a fading echo. But as the wind carried the sound of distant footsteps, perhaps James' return or a new challenge, Emily knew her vengeance had reshaped her. She would use her second chance not just to punish, but to rise, the leaf a silent witness to her transformation.